He laughed, not a chuckle, not a polite little giggle that anyone might excuse at the back of a classroom. No, this was a full-bodied, high-decibel laugh that echoed off the cinder-block walls and drilled straight into my chest. "You, a writer?" he said, tilting his head like I'd just suggested becoming an astronaut in a bathtub. I remember the exact shade of his tie that day, a garish orange stripe that made him look like a traffic cone with opinions. The sound of his laughter lingered in my ears long after the bell rang, like a sticky note I couldn't peel off. I wanted to disappear into the tiny crevice between the desks, a perfect hiding spot for crushed dreams. But the spark, oh, that tiny stubborn spark, refused to die. Even as my classmates snickered and scribbled mocking doodles, I clutched my notebook like a lifeboat in a storm. I wasn't ready to surrender. Not then, not ever. There's a peculiar warmth in being underestimated, a peculiar fire that ignites when someone so confidently dismisses your worth. I hated him, and yet, in that very hate, I found a kernel of determination. It was a strange, almost ticklish feeling, like biting into a lemon on purpose and enjoying the shock. Walking home that day, I held my notebook close, pretending it was a shield, imagining I was a secret agent guarding precious intel. The air smelled like damp concrete and crushed autumn leaves, and I let the scent mix with my resolve. Every step was a promise. I would write, even if my words fell flat like stale popcorn, even if the world laughed, even if he laughed, I would write. The first few pages were crude, awkward, and embarrassing. My sentences stumbled over themselves like toddlers learning to walk, and punctuation betrayed me like friends who forget your birthday. I remember one night I laughed at a line so poorly phrased it made my cat look at me like I had lost my mind. She probably thought I had officially gone over the edge, talking to imaginary editors in my bedroom. But I didn't stop. I kept writing, paragraph after paragraph, sentence after sentence, as if each word was a small rebellion against his laugh and the universe that had echoed it. Humor became my armor. I'd sprinkled tiny jokes in my writing, like breadcrumbs for future me to follow. He thought I'd fail, one line read, so I gave him the starring role in a villain's soliloquy. It felt cathartic, like mixing sugar and bitter coffee. Even when my words faltered, I found joy in their imperfection. I imagined my teacher reading my drafts in disbelief, maybe stifling a cough, maybe trying to hide an accidental smile. The fantasy alone was a quiet form of revenge, sweet and inconspicuous. Even at this early stage, I learned the peculiar magic of observation. People's expressions, the way sunlight bounced off wet pavement, the smell of old books, all became ingredients in my fledgling stories. I noticed how my teacher's tie always creased awkwardly at the shoulder, how his pen clicked in rhythm to his lectures, how he never noticed the student in the back corner scribbling furiously. Each detail fed my imagination. Every small observation became a seed that might one day grow into a story someone else would read. Of course, the spark didn't burn without turbulence. There were nights when doubt wrapped around me like an overly tight scarf. I'd stare at the ceiling, imagining a life where I'd given up, my notebooks buried under laundry or forgotten in a dusty drawer. The laughter came back in my mind, sharper this time, cutting and precise. I would shiver under the weight of it, then sit up straight, shake my head, and whisper to myself, "Not yet, not today." It was like wrestling with the phantom that knew all my weaknesses. And yet, even in defeat, I found a peculiar satisfaction in surviving each encounter. I discovered small joys in the act of writing itself. The scratch of pen on paper, the click of keys late at night, the aroma of coffee mingling with my imagination, it all became ritualistic, almost meditative. I'd read my sentences aloud, feeling the rhythm in my throat, savoring the cadence. Sometimes I'd exaggerate the voices of my characters, making them caricatures of my classmates, making my teacher the unwitting star of a particularly dramatic chapter. My room would fill with the soft sound of my own laughter, a gentle counterpoint to the harshness of memory. And so, the spark endured, glowing, faint but steady, a whisper in the dark that I started keeping a secret notebook, one that lived under my mattress, shielded from curious eyes and judgmental smirks. Its cover was plain, unremarkable gray cardboard with frayed corners, but inside, it was a universe. I wrote like a thief in the night, stealing moments from school hours and weekends, crafting sentences that I dared not speak aloud. Each word felt like a pulse, a small heartbeat insisting that I existed beyond ridicule. There was a strange thrill in hiding it, like having a diary that contained not just thoughts, but tiny rebellions against a world that had already doubted me. I remember one rainy Saturday, curled up on the couch with the rain drumming against the window, the notebook balanced precariously on my knees. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with my mother's cinnamon-scented candle, a perfect backdrop for imagining far-off cities and characters with impossible dreams. The pages blurred with the rain's rhythm as I scribbled furiously, inventing plots where teachers who laughed too loudly always tripped over their own hubris. I chuckled softly at the absurdity, imagining my own laughter bouncing around an empty classroom, mingling with the storm outside. Hiding my writing didn't just protect it, it transformed it into something sacred. The notebook became my confidant, the keeper of my ambitions. I wrote letters to imaginary editors, concocted conversations with characters who had no voice except in my head, and mapped out worlds where failures were just plot points, not verdicts. Sometimes I would write entire pages in the dark, flashlight under the covers, imagining that if I squinted hard enough, the words might float off the page and into reality. I can still feel the thrill of those late nights, the warmth of secrecy, the shivery excitement that comes when you're doing something forbidden, even if the only punishment would be mild disappointment from a parent. The notebook also became a mirror, reflecting my insecurities with brutal honesty. I wrote lines like, "Maybe I'm too small, too quiet, too clumsy with words." Yet somehow, reading them later, I found courage tucked between the margins, like little rabbits waiting to be discovered. I began to notice patterns in my fears, understanding that the teacher's laughter wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge, handed down like an invitation. And for some inexplicable reason, I wanted to accept it. Humor crept into my writing naturally, as if my pen couldn't help but poke fun at life's absurdities. I'd exaggerate teachers' quirks, invent ridiculous scenarios for classmates, or create melodramatic soliloquies for inanimate objects in my room. Once, I spent an entire afternoon writing a tragic love story between a lonely stapler and a lost paperclip, a plot so ridiculous it made my cat glance at me with an expression of complete judgment. The humor wasn't just amusement, it was armor. By laughing at imagined failures, I built resilience. I knew the world could be cruel, but if I could make fun of it first, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much. The notebook also became a compass for ambition. I kept lists of goals in the margins, tiny things that felt attainable. Submit a story to a magazine, finish a short novel, get a rejection and laugh at it. Some goals were ludicrously bold, like imagining my name on a library plaque or a book cover, but they weren't meant to be immediately attainable. They were meant to stretch me. Each scribble, each plot twist, each imagined conversation was a reminder that I could shape my future. The notebook whispered in ink and pencil that dreams were tangible if nurtured quietly. School, meanwhile, continued to be a theater of ridicule. The teacher still laughed, other students still whispered, and my heart still jumped every time my notebook nearly slipped from my backpack. But with the secret notebook, I felt untouchable in a way. I could create, destroy, rebuild, and even humiliate the world within its pages without fear of real-world consequences. Writing became a sanctuary, a cocoon, where the laughter of the teacher became nothing more than background noise, like distant traffic outside a warm, dark room. There were moments when I imagined handing the notebook to someone, anyone, to prove my worth, but those thoughts were fleeting. The notebook was mine, and the power it gave me was private, sacred. I could almost hear it hum with potential, the way an unused instrument vibrates when it senses music yet to come. And as I filled page after page, my confidence grew quietly, imperceptibly, like the first shoots of grass pushing through winter frost. By the time I was ready to share my stories with the world, the notebook had become more than paper and ink. It had become a testament to persistence, humor, and hope. It was proof that laughter, no matter how mocking, could be transformed into fuel. I didn't know it yet, but the pages tucked under my mattress were laying the foundation for every success that would follow. Each word, each secret scribble, was a step away from doubt and toward a life that I could shape entirely on my own terms. The thrill of secrecy, the joy of humor, the sense of quiet rebellion, all of it became part of my identity. And somewhere, beneath the ordinary motions of school, beneath the rain-soaked streets and the odd smells of the neighborhood, I found the truth. The notebook was not just a hiding place. It was a launch pad, and I was ready to take off, one scribbled word at a time. The first rejection hit harder than I expected. It wasn't a gentle thanks but no thanks tucked into an envelope with an apologetic stamp. No, it arrived with the bluntness of a hammer, a typed letter that made my stomach twist, my hands go cold, and my notebook suddenly feel heavier than ever. I remember reading it in the cafeteria, the hum of chatter around me fading into a low buzz, and the taste of my peanut butter sandwich turning inexplicably bitter. My story, my hours of scribbling, my late-night conspiracies with characters who felt more alive than anyone in my homeroom rejected. I wanted to crumple the letter and toss it into the trash, maybe light it on fire like in a dramatic movie. Instead, I folded it neatly and slipped it into my secret notebook, right between pages where my characters were mid-adventure. It was a bitter juxtaposition. One side, a story I loved. The other, a cold stamp of dismissal. I stared at it, and for a moment, I allowed myself a small, embarrassed pout. Even the cat seemed sympathetic, pausing to paw at my shoelaces as if to say, "It's okay, humans are weird." Humor, as always, came to the rescue. I wrote a little note in the margin. "Dear rejection, I see your face now. It's slightly smug. Don't worry, I'm coming for you." I laughed quietly, the kind of nervous, slightly hysterical laugh that only late teenagers seem to perfect. Somehow, writing a sassy retort made the sting less sharp, like sprinkling sugar over a bitter espresso shot. My notebook became a courtroom where I prosecuted the rejection, presented evidence paragraphs, witty dialogue, and flawed metaphors, and imagined a jury of imaginary writers nodding solemnly in my favor. It was during these moments that I learned the peculiar strength of persistence. I didn't fold, I didn't quit, and I didn't stop scribbling. Each rejection became a teacher in itself, harsh but instructive. I realized that stories, like people, had to endure scrutiny, had to survive disappointment, had to learn to laugh at missteps. There's a peculiar pride and resilience that is almost as satisfying as applause. I held on to that pride, whispering to my notebook at night, "You and I, will see who laughs last." Sometimes, I would imagine the teacher who laughed at me a decade earlier. What would he think if he knew that my rejected stories were only the beginning? Would he wrinkle his nose in confusion, or would he frown, trying to hide the shock that someone he dismissed was quietly climbing, word by word, sentence by sentence? The thought itself became a game, a private victory I could savor without anyone noticing. It was like keeping a tiny flame alive under a cold, gray sky, knowing that the wind couldn't snuff it out unless I let it. I began submitting stories to more places, small literary magazines, local newspapers, online journals. Each no stung, yes, but each maybe or considered felt like a whisper of promise. Rejections stacked up like dominoes, yet I kept writing, kept honing, kept laughing at the absurdity of it all. My cat sometimes wandered across the keyboard mid-typing, leaving behind cryptic sentences like, "The villain drinks tea at midnight." I took it in stride, incorporating it into the next draft, because sometimes serendipity disguises itself as a paw print. There were nights when the loneliness of it all crept in. Friends went to parties, teachers praised other students, the world moved on. And I sat in the quiet with my notebook and a desk lamp, buzzing like a mosquito. I would sip coffee far too strong, letting the bitterness sharpen my focus, imagining future me laughing at today's struggle from a library with sunlight spilling across polished floors. I began learning patience in its rawest form, the kind that demands endurance, not instant gratification. Rejection taught me more than any compliment ever could. It revealed my thresholds, my stubbornness, my sense of humor under pressure, and most importantly, my unwillingness to surrender. Every no forced me to examine my work, polish my sentences, reimagine characters, and occasionally invent entirely new plots. My notebook became a laboratory for trial and error, a place where mistakes weren't failures, they were experiments. Each experiment added layers to my craft, a careful weaving of resilience, wit, and imagination. I remember the day I finally mailed a story to a magazine that seemed just out of reach. I held the envelope in trembling hands, imagining it slipping into the postal chute like a message in a bottle. Maybe this one will stick, I whispered to myself. It wasn't just about acceptance anymore. It was about persistence, about defying the echo of laughter that had once haunted me. I knew that the teacher's mocking grin was still somewhere in the background, a reminder that the world is full of doubters. And yet, the idea that my words could endure beyond mockery became intoxicating, like the first sip of a long-awaited cup of coffee. Through all the rejections, late nights, and awkward plot twists, one truth solidified: persistence isn't glamorous. It isn't instantaneous. It isn't acknowledged immediately. But it's the quiet engine that drives ambition, the hidden rhythm behind triumph. And while the teacher's laughter had once felt like a wall, now it felt like a drumbeat, mocking, yes, but steady, keeping pace with the secret determination growing within me. I was still small, still uncertain, but each rejection, each setback, each cat-induced keyboard glitch made the spark in my chest flicker brighter. One day I knew it would flare into something impossible to ignore. Then came an unexpected mentor, someone I hadn't been looking for but couldn't have ignored even if I tried. I met her at a small literary workshop in a stuffy, book-scented community center, where the fluorescent lights hummed like caffeinated bees. She had sharp eyes that seemed to see the skeleton of a story before the words even breathed, and a smile that made you feel like your ideas mattered, even the messy ones. When I nervously handed her my short story, the one I had folded and refolded until the creases formed a roadmap of anxiety, she didn't laugh, not even a smirk. Instead, she leaned back, tapped her chin, and asked questions I hadn't even thought to ask myself. That day, I discovered what it meant to be understood. There's a peculiar comfort in having someone see potential in your work when so many others, including a certain orange tie-wearing teacher, had ridiculed it. I felt like a tiny plant that had finally found sunlight, each word I wrote stretching toward approval and guidance. She suggested edits gently but firmly, nudged my plot in directions I hadn't imagined, and most importantly, encouraged me to keep submitting. For the first time, I realized that mentorship wasn't about telling someone they were perfect. It was about helping them shape the imperfect into something compelling. Her enthusiasm was infectious. She had a way of describing narrative structure and character arcs that made my head spin in the best possible way, like a carnival ride. You can't resist. I began revising with purpose, no longer scribbling in secret for the sake of survival but for craft, for growth, for the exhilarating possibility that my words might reach someone outside my bedroom. She introduced me to other writers, critiques, and workshops where laughter was constructive, not cruel. It was intoxicating, like discovering a hidden cafe in a city you thought you knew by heart. I remember one evening, sitting on a threadbare couch in her office, the air thick with the aroma of overbrewed tea and paper dust, and thinking, this is what it feels like to be believed in. I scribbled notes feverishly, incorporating her insights and advice into my stories. My characters became more alive, my plot twists more deliberate, my humor sharper but subtler. For the first time, I sensed that writing was not just an act of defiance or escapism. It was a craft, a skill, a way to shape the world around me with nothing more than imagination and ink. Even then, humor remained my loyal companion. I still snuck little jokes into dialogue, playful nods to my own insecurities. My mentor would glance over a paragraph and chuckle softly at a character's ridiculous predicament, a sound that felt like applause, a quiet validation that I was on the right path. Humor had become both shield and sword, a way to withstand rejection and a way to charm readers into seeing the world through my eyes. In her presence, I learned that laughter could be constructive, a bridge rather than a barrier. The mentorship also brought discipline. I set writing schedules, learned to endure the monotony of drafting and redrafting, and discovered the joy of small, incremental victories. There were days when inspiration failed, when my pen froze mid-sentence, and I wanted to give up. But her voice in my head, the questions she asked, and the faith she placed in me pushed me forward. It was a steady reminder that progress often hides behind the dull grind, that brilliance is built on countless tiny, unseen moments of effort. Through her guidance, I realized that the laughter of my old teacher didn't have to define my narrative. It could be referenced, remembered, even transformed into a plot device, but it didn't have to control me. I started to write with intention, crafting scenes where doubt and ridicule became obstacles my characters overcame. The very sting that once immobilized me became fodder, a tool I wielded with subtle precision. Every sarcastic comment, every mocking smile, every sneer from the past was now a resource rather than a setback. By the time I left that workshop, I had transformed. I carried with me not only polished drafts, but a renewed sense of purpose. The mentorship reminded me that success wasn't instantaneous, wasn't guaranteed, and wasn't a straight line. It was messy, it was demanding, and it often required the patience of someone who understands that fire burns slow before it flares. And in the quiet moments alone with my notebook, I whispered thanks to her. And maybe, just maybe, a quiet, sardonic thank you to the teacher who once laughed, because without that spark of ridicule, I might never have sought someone who truly believed in me. The first seeds of belief, planted in that small office with stacks of paper and over-caffeinated tea, had taken root. And for the first time in years, I felt ready, not just to survive the world's laughter, but to rise above it, one carefully chosen word at a time. The years that followed were a blur of late nights, coffee, and relentless rewriting. I had discovered the intoxicating rhythm of persistence, and once you taste it, there's no turning back. My apartment became a shrine to my obsession, stacks of notebooks leaning like awkward sculptures, empty mugs forming a precarious tower, and sticky notes plastered across the walls with plot twists and character arcs. The smell of roasted coffee beans and ink became the perfume of my life, and even the cat, now a seasoned writing companion, seemed to understand that quiet hours meant serious business. I wrote at odd hours, 3 a.m., on weekdays, 10 p.m., on weekends, always chasing ideas that slipped like shadows when I paused too long. There were mornings when my eyes refused to open, but my pen refused to rest. Every rejection from magazines and contests became fuel, and every tiny praise, even if just a polite good effort, felt like a feather on my chest, lightening the weight of self-doubt. I learned to pace myself, measuring the distance between ambition and burnout, and often laughing at the ridiculousness of my own rituals. I even made a game out of it, counting how many times the cat jumped on my keyboard mid-sentence. Today's record was 7, which produced an accidental haiku. Keys clack, cat attacks, plot twist, falls on the floor, now coffee saves the day. Some nights, the solitude was almost unbearable. The hum of the refrigerator became a metronome, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows across my apartment floor. I would sip coffee that tasted like burnt charcoal and mutter dialogue out loud, testing the rhythm of my sentences, watching the steam rise from the mug like a miniature ghost haunting my desk. Humor became the lifeline, quiet jokes about my own exhaustion, absurd plot twists, exaggerated character quirks. I learned that even in isolation, laughter could sustain you, a gentle nudge reminding me that the world wasn't entirely serious. Publishing my first short story felt like peeking through a keyhole into another world. The editor's brief note, "We'd like to feature this in next month's issue," felt surreal, like hearing applause in a soundproof room. I carefully framed the rejection letters I had received over the years, placing them beside the acceptance letter. It was a private ceremony, a moment of reflection where failure and triumph coexisted on my desk. I whispered thanks to every sneer, every doubt, every laugh that had ever crossed my path. They had propelled me here, fueled my obsession, and sharpened my voice. During these years, I developed rituals. Morning coffee brewed strong enough to shock awake the dead, a playlist of ambient music that hummed softly in the background, and a notebook open at all times, ready to capture any idea that dared to flutter by. I even started walking in circles around my apartment to rehearse dialogue, waving my pen like a conductor's baton. The neighbors must have thought I was hosting a one-person theater company. Humor continued to sneak in, muttering sarcastic commentary to my characters mid-scene, imagining the cat rolling its eyes, or envisioning my old teacher reading my drafts and sputtering coffee onto his tie. Failures still came, naturally. Manuscripts returned with comments that stung like tiny pinpricks. Your pacing needs work. Character motivation unclear. This is derivative. Each critique, though, became a puzzle, a challenge, a way to refine my craft. I learned patience in its rawest form, the steady, grinding endurance that separates those who dream from those who achieve. I realized that writing was less about inspiration and more about perseverance, discipline, and the willingness to revisit and revise until the story could sing. Humor remained my secret weapon. I discovered that self-deprecating jokes, playful narrative detours, and clever metaphors could transform even the most mundane scene into something memorable. One chapter featured a character tripping over a stack of overdue library books, and I swore the scene made the cat smirk. These small doses of levity were my lifeline, proof that joy could exist even in struggle. My notebook was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a laboratory where failure and humor coexisted, producing unpredictable and often delightful results. Late nights stretched into early mornings, months into years. I wrote, revised, and wrote again, often questioning if it would ever be enough. But in the quiet hours, when the world slept and only the cat prowled my desk for paper scraps, I felt the rhythm of progress. Every paragraph completed, every chapter refined, every story submitted was a step further from the laughter that once humiliated me, and a step closer to the life I was determined to build. Persistence had become a form of intimacy, a love affair with my craft, and I cherished every minute, every typo, every awkward plot twist that carried me forward. By the end of those years, I was no longer just a student of rejection. I was a practitioner of resilience, a connoisseur of quiet victories, a believer in the subtle power of humor and discipline. And as I brewed my next cup of coffee and opened my notebook, I realized that the spark that had survived ridicule in a classroom long ago was now a steady flame, illuminating the path ahead. I was still alone, still slightly obsessive, still fueled by caffeine and stubbornness, but I was becoming the writer I had once only dreamed of being. Then it happened, my first bestseller. I still remember the day the email arrived. Subject line, bold and impersonal. Congratulations, your book is selected for publication. My hands trembled as I clicked it open, and a strange mixture of disbelief, relief, and barely contained giddiness washed over me. I paced my tiny apartment, dodging the cat, who seemed increasingly suspicious of my sudden, jittery energy. I laughed, tripped over a stack of manuscripts, spilled coffee across an old draft, and somehow, amid the chaos, felt like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for a decade. The novel hit the shelves like an unassuming meteor. Early reviews trickled in, sometimes glowing, sometimes tepid, but they all mattered. I reveled in the small victories, a stranger emailing to say my words had made them laugh or cry, a bookstore display featuring my book cover, the faint hum of a local radio host mentioning my name. It was surreal, like stepping onto a stage without realizing anyone had built the stage for you. My old teacher's mocking laughter, which had once cut so sharply, now felt distant, almost irrelevant. Still, I imagined him reading the news, eyebrows raised, the corners of his mouth twitching as he processed the irony. Success didn't arrive fully formed. There were logistical headaches, edits, marketing calls, readings, interviews, and the constant pressure to keep producing. My coffee addiction deepened. My cat perfected the art of lounging on top of manuscripts, but every challenge carried the faint thrill of vindication. The years of late nights, rejections, and secret scribbles culminated in tangible proof. My words had power, my voice mattered, and the spark that survived ridicule had grown into a beacon. Humor remained my lifeline. Even during promotional events, I slipped little jokes into readings, sarcastic asides, exaggerated character voices, or playful commentary about my own awkwardness. Audiences chuckled, some politely, some genuinely, and I realized humor could disarm tension, charm skeptics, and turn even the most mundane anecdote into an engaging performance. It reminded me of those secret notebook nights, when laughter kept the shadows at bay, and I understood that joy wasn't merely a side effect of success. It was a tool, a companion, and a gentle reminder of why I wrote in the first place. Family reactions were mixed. My parents were cautiously proud, nodding over dinners with a wary eye, while distant relatives offered faint praise, carefully measured compliments shadowed by disbelief. My siblings teased me mercilessly, of course, turning my newfound fame into running jokes at family gatherings. "Oh, look, the writer has returned," they'd say, mock bows included. I laughed with them, inwardly savoring each joke as proof that life had come full circle. I could finally be the subject of playful ridicule rather than scornful laughter. The bestseller opened doors I hadn't dared to imagine. Invitations to speak at literary events, requests for interviews, and even a small stipend from a grant gave me freedom to focus entirely on writing. My apartment slowly transformed from cluttered chaos to a semi-organized creative hub. I still kept stacks of notebooks, still brewed coffee strong enough to shock anyone who dared sip it, and still hid little scribbles for the cat to edit. Routine became ritual, ritual became habit, and habit became the invisible scaffolding holding my career together. I learned to appreciate the surreal absurdities of success. A bookstore manager once called to say someone had bought 20 copies of my book as gifts, and I imagined an elaborate chain of events culminating in a giant, secret celebration somewhere. I laughed alone in my kitchen because really, who else would appreciate the humor of such a scenario at 2 a.m., with a cat surveying my chaotic desk like a miniature critic? Even the small triumphs became occasions for gentle celebration, reminders that the journey was as rich as the destination. Through it all, I never lost sight of the spark that had carried me from that classroom, from that mocking laugh, to the edge of possibility. Success didn't erase the past, it reframed it. The laughter that once stung now felt almost like a percussive beat in the background of my life, a rhythm marking progress, persistence, and endurance. I smiled at the thought. The very thing that had once wounded me had, indirectly, propelled me forward. And so, with my first bestseller in hand, I understood a fundamental truth. The journey to success is rarely linear. It's messy, unpredictable, full of late nights and spilled coffee, rejection letters and secret laughter. But if you nurture that tiny spark, if you persist with humor, discipline, and a stubborn belief in your own vision, you can transform ridicule into triumph. And sometimes, just sometimes, the laughter you once feared becomes the applause you didn't know you were waiting for. Celebrating my first bestseller with family was, unsurprisingly, a mixed affair. My parents, proud but cautious, offered gentle congratulations, as if saying too much might jinx my success. My younger siblings, never ones to resist humor, immediately turned the moment into a running gag. "Careful, don't let the fame go to your head," one teased, brandishing a fork like a mock microphone. I laughed along, hiding the deep satisfaction that my words, once ridiculed, now commanded attention. Family gatherings became a curious mixture of warmth, envy, and subtle competition, like a game of musical chairs where everyone hoped someone else would trip. It wasn't that they resented my success outright. They just had trouble reconciling the shy, awkward child they knew with the writer whose name appeared on book covers and magazine features. Every compliment felt tempered, measured, a careful balance between admiration and disbelief. "We're proud of you, really," said my mother, eyes darting toward my father, as if to check he agreed. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in their expressions, the old judgments quietly whispering, "You might not be able to sustain this." But here's the thing. I had spent years perfecting the art of quiet triumph. I smiled, nodded, and let their mixed feelings roll past me, like water over polished stone. Even my siblings got creative with their teasing. One afternoon, I opened the fridge to find a sticky note. "Warning, genius at work. Handle with care." Another note appeared on my laptop keyboard. "Author in residence. Beware of sudden brilliance." I laughed so hard that my cat shot me a disdainful glance, clearly unimpressed with human antics. Humor, once again, proved indispensable, a bridge between pride and absurdity, between humility and recognition. I also noticed the subtle envy in some relatives, the kind that crept into conversations with pointed questions about my earnings or hints about the fleeting nature of fame. These moments could have stung, but I had learned to deflect them with humor or gentle redirection. "Yes, my book sells well," I'd say with a smile, "but the cat still refuses to sign autographs." Laughter, real or forced, became a shield, a way to acknowledge reality without letting it dictate my mood. Even the celebrations themselves were tinged with contradictions. Family dinners became spectacles, with my achievements mentioned between casual critiques of my wardrobe or jabs at my obsessive coffee consumption. 3 cups before breakfast again? My father would ask. I would nod solemnly, as if performing a ritual, and sip my 4th cup while internally reveling in the absurdity. These small, ironic victories felt richer than any award, a reminder that life's humor and complexity were inseparable from achievement. Amid the teasing, the envy, and the careful pride, I began to understand the subtleties of success. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about navigating reactions, about understanding that triumphs could provoke discomfort in those closest to you. Family dynamics, I realized, were a landscape as challenging to traverse as any plot twist in my novels. And in these interactions, I discovered a new kind of storytelling, the careful art of listening, observing, and turning everyday moments into insight for characters and narrative arcs. The mixed feelings extended beyond words. I noticed glances, sighs, pauses, and sudden silences, subtle reminders that while my achievements were tangible, emotions were always messy. Celebrations became exercises in diplomacy, humor, and subtle validation, like a writer negotiating the delicate balance between criticism and encouragement in a workshop. I realized that this, too, was part of the journey, learning to hold space for others' insecurities without diminishing my own. Even so, the spark of joy remained, bright and unyielding. I reveled in the private satisfaction of seeing my dreams realized, of holding a book in my hands that had once existed only in my secret notebook. Family's mixed reactions, I discovered, were merely part of the background noise of life, a contrast that made my victories taste even sweeter. Every playful jab, every veiled judgment, every exaggerated compliment became part of the rich tapestry of my experience. Through it all, humor kept me grounded. I could laugh at myself, at the absurdities of family dynamics, at the ongoing struggle to balance pride and humility. These moments of levity became as important as any award or review, gentle reminders that life, messy, contradictory, and occasionally ridiculous, was meant to be observed with curiosity and wit. And as I navigated these family complexities, I realized that my success was not just measured in bestseller lists or public acclaim, but in the quiet ability to find amusement, grace, and resilience amidst the chaos of human relationships. Amid the whirlwind of family reactions and professional milestones, I began to think bigger. Small victories were sweet, but I wanted my words, and the opportunities they brought, to ripple outward, beyond my own success. That's when the idea of a literacy charity began to take shape. It started as a whisper, a thought tucked between caffeine-fueled mornings and scribbled drafts. What if I could create the kind of classrooms I always dreamed of, the ones that nurtured curiosity instead of crushing it with laughter? The vision was simple but ambitious, to establish a foundation that would provide books, resources, and spaces where children could explore stories without judgment. I imagined libraries with soft lighting, cozy corners, and shelves filled with worlds waiting to be discovered. No orange tie laughter here, just the quiet hum of imagination. I pictured students huddled together with notebooks, pens, scratching paper, eyes wide with the thrill of creation, just as mine once had been. Planning the charity was both exhilarating and absurdly complex. I balanced budgets, grant applications, and meetings with an excitement that often made me laugh at the sheer improbability of it all. I imagined myself juggling spreadsheets in one hand, a coffee mug in the other, while my cat attempted to assist by walking across the keyboard. The humor of it all kept me grounded. The seriousness of bureaucracy could have crushed my enthusiasm, but laughter transformed obstacles into playful puzzles. I also wanted the foundation to honor the teachers who had shaped us, both the good and the less inspiring. It was an idea rooted in subtle irony, a way to recognize the paradoxes of education. Classrooms can inspire, but they can also wound, and both experiences mold us in ways we might not immediately appreciate. My own past, the laughter that once stung, became the driving force behind creating spaces where future writers would feel supported rather than ridiculed. Developing programs for young writers was endlessly rewarding. We hosted workshops where children could write freely, read aloud without fear, and discover the magic of storytelling. I marveled at their uninhibited imagination, the way a single prompt could unleash torrents of creativity. Every giggle, every bright-eyed question, every story crafted with earnest effort felt like a small miracle. It reminded me of my own hidden notebook nights, of the thrill of words whispered into darkness, waiting to take flight. Of course, humor remained a constant companion. I incorporated playful exercises, like rewriting famous fairy tales with absurd twists or imagining interviews with fictional characters about their daily frustrations. Laughter filled the rooms, a gentle hum that punctuated scribbles and scribbled drafts. It was healing, transformative, a reminder that even in structured learning, joy could be the catalyst for growth. There were challenges, naturally. Fundraising meetings sometimes droned on endlessly. Bureaucrats occasionally questioned our unconventional approach, and the logistics of distributing books across multiple schools became a miniature labyrinth. Yet, every challenge was met with the same philosophy that had guided me through rejections, failures, and late nights: patience, persistence, and a sense of humor. Even the cat seemed to approve, now a seasoned participant in Zoom calls where he occasionally stepped across keyboards, leaving digital paw prints that became minor comedic relief. Over time, the foundation grew, quietly but steadily. Schools that once had bare shelves began receiving crates of books. Libraries that had dim lighting now glowed warmly, and children who had never seen a desk drawer full of stories now found worlds at their fingertips. Every donation, every workshop, every story shared felt like a ripple in a pond, extending beyond my own life and into countless others. I began to understand that success isn't merely personal, it's relational. It's about creating conditions where others can flourish too. And so, the irony of it all became delicious. The laughter that had once wounded me became the engine driving a project that would nurture future writers. The teacher's dismissive grin, now a faint memory, had indirectly inspired the creation of spaces where children could dream freely. The spark that survived ridicule had transformed into a quiet, enduring blaze, illuminating paths for others. Humor, resilience, and ambition intertwined, creating something larger than myself, a legacy not of fame, but of possibility. The reveal was predictably bittersweet. After years of planning, fundraising, and meticulous coordination, our first major library project was ready for inauguration. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the smell of new books and fresh paint, and I felt the familiar tingle of anticipation, a mix of pride and nerves coiled in my chest. Students, teachers, and local officials gathered, faces bright with curiosity, chatting and shuffling like leaves caught in a gentle wind. I carried a stack of ceremonial documents and a key to the library, feeling the weight of the moment with every careful step. And there he was, my old teacher, the very man whose laughter had once echoed so sharply in my ears. I almost didn't recognize him, framed awkwardly among parents and colleagues, a slightly stooped figure with a polite, cautious smile. I imagined all the disbelief flashing behind his eyes as he took in the scene: shelves filled with books, children clustered around reading corners, sunlight streaming through large windows. And there, carved prominently on the entrance plaque, was his name. My private, ironic tribute now made public, etched in wood and stone for all to see. I walked up to him slowly, heart thumping with a strange combination of pride and mischievous satisfaction. "Surprised?" I asked, voice calm, almost teasing. He swallowed, nodded, and cleared his throat. "I didn't expect this," he said, the corners of his mouth twitching in a mixture of pride, disbelief, and maybe a touch of embarrassment. I smiled softly. Humor, subtle and satisfying, lingered in that silence. There was no gloating, no spectacle, just a quiet acknowledgement that life had a peculiar sense of justice. The children explored the library like explorers discovering new continents. Their eyes sparkled with curiosity, hands grazing the spines of books, whispers bouncing off the walls. Teachers mingled with excitement, occasionally glancing at the plaque with wide eyes, perhaps realizing the layers of irony in its presence. I watched them, a gentle smile tugging at my lips, and felt a strange serenity settle over me. All those years of struggle, the secret notebooks, late nights, rejections, and laughter, all of it had led to this. During the ceremony, I spoke briefly. I didn't want to turn it into a spectacle, but I felt compelled to acknowledge both the children and the man whose laughter had inadvertently inspired this moment. This library, I said, voice steady, is a place where curiosity is nurtured, where every story matters, and where laughter is welcome, for learning, for joy, and sometimes even for irony. The audience laughed politely, and I caught the gleam of understanding in my teacher's eyes. Perhaps he finally grasped that his mockery had not hindered me, it had shaped me. I could almost see him replaying the past in his mind, the orange-tie classroom, the echoing laughter, the tiny student clutching a notebook like a shield. The memory must have seemed strange, almost absurd, now standing before a living testament to persistence, resilience, and quiet triumph. I didn't gloat. I simply let the irony settle, subtle and satisfying, like a gentle musical chord that resolves perfectly after dissonance. Humor, patience, and time had orchestrated a victory far sweeter than any dramatic confrontation could have been. The children, meanwhile, continued to explore, oblivious to the layers of history etched into the walls. Their laughter, soft and sincere, filled the library with a warmth I hadn't realized I was missing in my own childhood. I watched a boy curl up with a tattered adventure novel, a girl flip pages of a picture book with wide eyes, and thought about how this was the spark I wanted to ignite, the love of stories, of words, of imagination, unburdened by ridicule. My own journey, once marked by private rebellion, had now blossomed into a public opportunity for others. And then, finally, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. The plaque, the smiling children, the quiet acknowledgement in my teacher's eyes, all of it settled into my chest with a peculiar satisfaction, a soft hum of completion. The laughter that had once stung was now a distant echo, transformed into gentle rhythm that underscored a story of triumph, not mockery. I realized that revenge doesn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet, elegant, and wrapped in kindness, like carving a teacher's name on a library that inspires a generation. As the ceremony ended, I shook hands, posed for photos, and watched the children scatter to explore every nook and cranny. The sunlight caught dust motes dancing in the air, like tiny golden stars suspended in time. My heart was full, not with vindictiveness, but with the gentle satisfaction of completion, a sense that one chapter of my life had reached a poignant, ironic, and deeply fulfilling conclusion. After the inauguration, life settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and comforting. The foundation became a second home, the library, a daily reminder of what persistence, humor, and quiet rebellion could achieve. I spent mornings coordinating programs, afternoons writing, and evenings sipping coffee while reviewing manuscripts from aspiring young writers. The cat, now a seasoned veteran of literary chaos, lounged across the stacks of paper like a silent, judgmental partner in crime. Humor remained our constant, whether in whispered commentary about clumsy plot twists or in sarcastic notes left in the margins of student submissions. Success, I realized, had a curious duality. On one hand, it was tangible, books published, programs running, plaques adorning walls. On the other, it was intangible, a confidence that had quietly built itself over years of hidden effort, laughter in the face of ridicule, and countless small victories that no one else noticed. The irony of it all, of course, never failed to amuse me. That same laughter which once wounded me had catalyzed a journey leading to accomplishment, generosity, and subtle, private joy. I often imagined my old teacher reading about the foundation in the local paper, eyebrow raised, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Perhaps he finally understood. His mockery had been fuel. I watched the children who came to our programs with fascination. Their curiosity was infectious, their creativity boundless. One girl wrote a story about a talking cat who secretly edited a human's novels, and I laughed so hard that I nearly spilled my coffee. Another boy submitted a sci-fi tale with a robot librarian, and I marveled at the depth of imagination packed into 10-year-old handwriting. Observing them reminded me of my own hidden notebook nights, the thrill of clandestine creativity, and the joy of humor as both shield and sword. It felt like looking into a mirror of possibility, a reflection of what could be nurtured when ridicule was replaced with encouragement. Even the mundane became imbued with meaning. Morning coffee tasted richer because it was paired with quiet victories, emails from schools accepting donations, notes from young writers expressing gratitude, or the cat's judgmental glance when I mispronounced a character's name aloud. Humor threaded through every interaction, a gentle rhythm that softened bureaucracy, soothed frustrations, and reminded me that even in success, delight could be found in small, absurd details. Life had not become perfect. It had become lively, textured, and quietly magical. And then, as all stories eventually do, the pace slowed. I reflected on the journey that had carried me from that classroom where laughter once stung, to this present filled with accomplishment, joy, and subtle irony. I realized that every rejection, every mocking comment, every late night spent scribbling in secret had contributed to the life I now inhabited. The notebook under my mattress, once a secret world, had become a metaphor for persistence, humor, and the quiet power of imagination. I understood, finally, that success was not a single moment. It was a mosaic, composed of countless tiny, often humorous victories. Humor remained a faithful companion, subtle but present, infusing even the most ordinary moments with lightness. I would catch myself muttering playful critiques to the cat while editing drafts, laughing softly at imagined scenarios where characters confronted their own absurdities, or whispering sarcastic asides to the echo of a memory. These small doses of levity kept the journey joyful, reminding me that the story of life, like literature, required balance, tension and release, seriousness and humor, struggle and delight. Looking back, I could trace every step along the path. The teacher's mocking laugh, the secret notebook, the relentless rewriting, the small victories, the mentors, the family's mixed reactions, and finally the foundation that carried forward both humor and hope. Each moment connected, a chain of causality that was both ironic and satisfying. My journey had been shaped not by a single triumph, but by persistence, humor, and the delicate artistry of turning ridicule into resilience. And so, I settled into a quiet evening, notebook open, cat perched beside me, a cup of coffee cooling slowly. I reflected on the journey not with arrogance, but with gentle satisfaction. The laughter that once stung was now transformed into a rhythm, subtle and soft, a reminder of the past without holding power over the present. Persistence had paid off, humor had softened every blow, and imagination had turned small rebellions into lasting legacies. Life, I realized, could be both kind and ironic, funny and fulfilling, challenging and deeply satisfying, all at once. Now, as I sit beneath the soft pool of lamplight, the world outside quiets itself. The laughter of the day fades into the hum of night traffic, a rhythm steady enough to write by. The air smells faintly of paper and ink, old companions, and somewhere in the distance a stray cat meows, perhaps arguing with the moon. My breath slows as if matching the stillness around me. Everything feels lighter now, like a story whose final page knows how to rest. The teacher's laugh, once so sharp, has long dissolved into memory's gentle static. It no longer wounds, it just exists, a faint note in the background of a much larger song. Sometimes I think of that classroom again, the dust on the windowsill, the squeak of chalk, the awkward silence after the joke. But the scene no longer plays with bitterness. It drifts by like an old film reel, edges soft and golden. Perhaps somewhere he too remembers, though maybe only as a curious detail from a long ago afternoon. I trace the grain of the desk with my fingertips, feeling how time smooths everything. The foundation continues, the library hums with the laughter of children, and my own writing has slowed to a comfortable heartbeat. Words come not from urgency now, but from gratitude. Even the small imperfections, the typos, the smudged coffee rings, seem like part of the story's texture. There's something soothing in accepting that not everything must be flawless to be beautiful. The night deepens, and I close the notebook. I imagine the shelves in the library glowing faintly, like lanterns guiding small hands toward wonder. I picture the children turning pages, their eyes bright, unaware that somewhere, a former student is smiling quietly in the dark, listening to the echo of their laughter. The world feels round and complete, like a sentence that finally finds its period. So I breathe in slowly, let the air settle, Let the old laughter dissolve into the background of a peaceful night. Let the quiet hum of contentment fill the space where ambition once burned fiercely. The story has come full circle now. Irony softened into calm, revenge transformed into kindness, success folded neatly into serenity. Sleep well, little storyteller within me. Tomorrow, there will be new words, new laughter, and maybe even another cup of coffee, too strong for its own good. But for now, just stillness, just breath, just the soft whisper of a page closing.